Let's talk about one of the most complicated relationships on the planet. What happens when the world's biggest company and the world's rising superpower get locked into a relationship they just can't seem to escape? Yeah, we're diving deep into the forced marriage between Apple and China. And believe me, this story is about way more than just who builds your iPhone. So let's start with a crazy hypothetical. What would actually happen if the US and China just called it quits, like overnight? A full-on economic divorce. Is it just another trade war, a tech Cold War? Or, is it something way more dangerous for literally all of us? At the very heart of this entire situation is one single, really provocative idea. China built Apple, and Apple built China. Now, I know that statement makes a lot of people pretty uncomfortable, but if we really want to understand the world we're living in today, we have to figure out how that happened. To get it, our story doesn't start in some fancy boardroom. It starts on the edge of a cliff. We have to rewind all the way back to the mid-90s, when Apple wasn't the titan it is today. No, it was a company about to go completely bankrupt, and a truly desperate decision was about to change, well, everything. So let's set the scene. It's March 1996, and Apple is basically on the life support. Forget the $3 trillion giant we know now. This version of Apple was dying. Its cash reserves were just plummeting, there were mass layoffs, and they were selling off their last factories for parts. I mean, a former Apple VP, John O'Sullivan, tells this story about selling the company's very last major US factory. The call he got from his boss was blunt. If this deal doesn't close tonight, nobody is getting paid this week. Apple wasn't just sinking, it was totally drowning. And that desperation is what forced them to look abroad and go all in on outsourcing. And after years of searching, Apple found the one place that would redefine its entire future: China. But here's the thing everyone gets wrong. This partnership was never just about cheap labor. It was about something much bigger, a massive transfer of knowledge. It was about building an entire industrial brain from pretty much scratch. You see, the deal China offered was, it was completely unheard of. The message to Apple, through Foxconn's founder, Terry Gou, was crystal clear. I don't want your profit. I want your knowledge. China wasn't playing for next quarter's earnings. They were playing the long game. And that is when the industrial madness really began. People think Apple trained thousands of workers. Nope. Apple trained 28 million Chinese workers. 28 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That figure alone explains like half of the entire Apple-China story. So China didn't just learn how to screw gadgets together. They absorbed Apple's entire industrial DNA. We're talking about their advanced production systems, their incredible engineering speed, the logic behind their supply chains, and that fanatical, almost obsessive discipline for quality control. All of that knowledge built the largest electronics manufacturing ecosystem on the entire planet. So who really won financially? Well, the outcome of this deal is just staggering. Take a look at this. Foxconn's profit margins, they absolutely collapsed from around 10% down to just 2% today. Meanwhile, Apple's valuation exploded into the trillions. Apple basically traded manufacturing know-how for something way more valuable: total control of the brand, the software, and, of course, the lion's share of the profit. While all this was happening, China was playing a much bigger strategic game. They have this philosophy they call the catfish effect. The idea is you let a big, strong competitor, the catfish, into your pond to force all your local companies, the sardines, to get faster and stronger just to survive. Apple was the ultimate catfish, and its presence basically supercharged China's entire tech industry. But then, right around 2013, the whole dynamic started to shift. The relationship, which had been purely about business, began to get intensely political. You could say the student was on the verge of becoming the master. All of a sudden, Chinese state media launched this series of attacks on Apple. They accused them of everything from poor warranties to exploiting workers. The pressure was really mounting, and Tim Cook got the message loud and clear. Just being a business success in China wasn't enough anymore. The game had changed. It was political now. So in 2016, Tim Cook makes this secret trip to China and signs a massive $275 billion deal. And this wasn't just about building more iPhones. It was a promise to invest heavily in China's own tech sector. It was a clear political move, a way to prove Apple was a partner, not just a customer taking advantage of them. But even with that massive deal, geopolitical tensions just kept rising. And that led to a brand new phrase you hear in boardrooms everywhere, the diversification tax. And this is the true hidden price of that potential economic divorce between the US and China we talked about. And it leads to a concept economists are now calling supply chain inflation. It's pretty simple, really. As companies get pushed to rely less on China, they have to move their production somewhere else. But that move isn't free. It comes with a really hefty price tag that, guess what, gets passed on to you, the consumer. This chart shows you the direct cost. Manufacturing pretty much anywhere outside of China is estimated to be 10 to 20% more expensive right out of the gate. And why is that? Because no other country on Earth can yet match China's incredible mix of speed, scale, and its deeply interconnected network of suppliers. It's just a machine. So who's going to foot the bill for this? The companies? Yeah, right. It's us, the consumers. The price of your next iPhone, your laptop, pretty much all of our electronics, it's all going to go up. And not because the tech is better, but simply to cover the cost of trying to leave China. But look, the cost of your next phone? That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are even deeper, more strategic threats that make this breakup seem, well, almost impossible. These are the hidden forces that are binding these two giants together, whether they like it or not. Okay, threat number one, a serious dependency on rare earth elements. Now, these materials aren't necessarily rare in the ground, but they're incredibly difficult and messy to process. And they are the essential, non-negotiable ingredient for literally all modern technology: phones, computer chips, EV batteries, even military hardware like fighter jets and missiles. And here is where China has a genuine chokehold. It's not just about mining this stuff. As you can see from this chart, China completely dominates the complex refining and processing technology. So even if the US finds new mines tomorrow, they'd probably still have to send the raw materials to China just to make them usable. All right, next up is a threat almost nobody talks about: your retirement fund. Seriously, Apple alone makes up about 7% of the S&P 500 index. Millions and millions of American 401ks are tied to that index. So what does that mean? It means any major political blow to Apple in China directly hits the retirement savings of ordinary Americans, even if you've never owned an iPhone in your life. And finally, if you're still not convinced how tangled this web really is, just look at this number. Out of Apple's 187 most critical global suppliers, 150 of them are based in China. Think about that. Every display, every battery, every microchip comes from that incredibly dense network. Trying to rebuild that somewhere else would be like trying to replace an airplane's engine mid-flight. It's almost unthinkable. So this relationship that once saved a drowning company has now morphed into one of the world's biggest geopolitical dilemmas. China built Apple, and Apple built China, and now each one has become the other's biggest risk. It leaves us with a huge question. Is the US really willing to sacrifice consumer prices and the stability of our retirement accounts for this breakup? Or are these two giants simply trapped in a forced economic marriage with no exit in sight?